Hello, this is a recording on the book How Children Fail by John Holt. This idea that children won't learn without outside rewards and penalties usually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So many people have said to me, if we didn't make children do things, then they would not do anything. Even worse, they will add, if I were not made to do things, I wouldn't do anything. It is the creed of a slave to think this way, to think in terms of positive and negative reinforcement. You didn't feel that way about yourself when you were little. In your earliest experiences as a child, you did not think of yourself as somebody who had to be forced to do something. You wanted to do things on your own initiative. However, at some point, the belief coagulates, and that belief is, if I weren't made to do things, I wouldn't do anything. The question is, do the schools teach this message by accident or on purpose? I don't think they know. And when he says they, he's referring to his staff. He's referring to the teachers he works with, the faculty. So he insists, he goes on to say, believing it, they can't help acting as if it were true. John Holt suspects that people teach this creed, the creed of a slave, because they believe it personally, and so they can't help acting as if it were true. So the teacher or the professional adult who is taking it upon himself to help children literally cannot help himself. There is a compulsion to force people to do things, to make them do things. That is the compulsion of somebody who lives by the creed of a slave. And the creed of the slave is, once again, if we didn't make children do things, they wouldn't do anything. Further, if I weren't made to do things, I wouldn't do anything. He then goes on to talk about fear and anxiety and how he questions whether human beings were meant to live in fear and anxiety for such long periods of time in such frequent intervals. He writes, there are very few children who do not feel, during most of the time they are in school, a certain amount of fear, anxiety, and tension that most adults would find intolerable. It is no coincidence at all that in many of their worst nightmares, adults find themselves back in school. John Holt writes, I was a successful student, yet now and then I have such nightmares myself. In mine, I am always going to a class from which, without the slightest excuse, I have been absent for months. I know that I am hopelessly behind in the work and that my long absence is going to get me in serious trouble. This is him describing a nightmare. And when he says I have to go, he's talking, his nightmare is that he has to go to a class. He has no choice but to go to a class, but he hasn't been there for months. And he's hopelessly behind. He goes on to write, it is a good deal worse to feel that many children are reacting to school in ways that are not under their control at all. To feel that you are helping make children less intelligent is bad enough, without having to wonder whether you may be helping to make them neurotic as well. So there's certainly a shadow being cast when we talk about this interior subjective evaluation of oneself as a professional teacher or as a helper. You come across a pretty thick shadow. It starts to appear as if your efforts are actually making the children less intelligent, more fearful, and neurotic. So that is something I know about the book How Children Fail by John Holt.